Hello, this is Mark Grier. For the next hour, I'll be reading from the January 22nd issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, first article for today. Trump's Board of Peace would have global scope, but one man in charge. The initiative is the latest example of the president dismantling the post-World War II international system and building a new one with himself at the center. In the proposed charter of the Board of Peace that the United States sent to national capitals in recent weeks, one man has the power to veto decisions, approve the agenda, invite members, dissolve the board entirely, and designate his own successor. His name is spelled out in Article 3.2. Donald J. Trump shall serve as inaugural chairman. If Trump, then peace, Prime Minister Viktor Orban of Hungary, one of President Trump's closest allies in Europe, wrote on Facebook on Sunday after Mr. Trump invited him to join the board. We have, of course, accepted this honorable invitation. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Israel, Belarus, Pakistan, and several more countries also said they were joining, ahead of the signing ceremony Thursday in Switzerland. But many officials and experts in international affairs were stunned by the breadth of the initiative. The latest example of Mr. Trump taking apart the American-built post-World War II international system and building a new one with himself at the center. This is a direct assault on the United Nations, said Mark Weller, a Cambridge international law professor who specializes in peace negotiations and has worked closely with the global body. This initiative is likely to be seen as a takeover of the world order by one individual in his own image. The UN Security Council itself endorsed the creation of a Board of Peace in November, in a resolution welcoming the U.S. brokered peace plan to end Israel's war in Gaza. According to that resolution, the board is to function as a transitional administration through 2027 to oversee the redevelopment of Gaza. But in unveiling the Board of Peace in the last week, the Trump administration has cast Gaza as only a part of what the new institution would do. While its powers are not defined, its mission would overlap with the United Nations' aim of maintaining international peace and security. Trump has proven himself a pretty capable and aggressive leader, said Fred Fleitz, the chief of staff of the National Security Council for part of Mr. Trump's first term. This is taking advantage of it. The proposed charter, seen by the New York Times, says the board would seek to secure enduring peace in areas affected or threatened by conflict. Steve Witkoff, Mr. Trump's peace envoy, who was named as a member of the group's executive board, told CNBC that more than 20 countries had already agreed to join and that the Board of Peace would be a great group of leaders coming together and sharing opinion to achieve peace. He listed Russia, Ukraine, Iran, Sudan, and Syria as among the places in need of bridging relationships. I wish the United Nations could do more, Mr. Trump said Tuesday. I wish we didn't need a Board of Peace. Asked whether he wanted the board to replace the United Nations, Mr. Trump said that it might. He added, I believe you got to let the UN continue because the potential is so great. The United Nations itself has sought to play down any tensions, a spokesman, Farhan Haq, told reporters that the UN has coexisted alongside any number of organizations. But the Trump administration's ambiguous messaging about the Board of Peace has added to the head-spinning nature of an extraordinary January in American foreign policy. The U.S. attack on Venezuela, the threats to strike on Iran, and Mr. Trump's demands to take over Greenland have all sent the message that the United States is seeking to exert its global power in a newly unilateral way. The Board of Peace, with its sprawling mission and with Mr. Trump as its long-term chairman, appeared to be an attempt at building an institution to codify the American dominance that the president envisions. Norway, Sweden, and France have already said they do not intend to join. The French Foreign Minister, Jean-Noël Barrot, said his country would say no to creating an organization as it has been presented, which would replace the United Nations, according to the United Press. The bond of trust has been broken between the United States and its allies, said R. Nicholas Burns, a former U.S. ambassador to NATO, China, and elsewhere. The overreach by the administration on Greenland and the miscalculation they have made has recently brought about a different European view and Canadian view. 2 weeks ago, Mr. Trump withdrew from 66 international organizations that his administration deemed wasteful, ineffective, and harmful. He has suggested that he sees his board filling some of that vacuum, offering the world a more assertive brand of American engagement, personified by Mr. Trump. The Board of Peace will be established as a new international organization, Mr. Trump wrote in his letter to Mr. Orban, which the Hungarian Prime Minister posted online. The organization's charter says in its opening line that durable peace requires the courage to depart from approaches and institutions that have too often failed. Mr. Fleets, who is now at the America First Policy Institute, a conservative think tank close to the administration, said the decision to include Russia and China among the invited members reflected the intended broad-based nature of the board. They want to reduce the possibility that various countries will try to sabotage it, he said. Russia and China have veto power on the UN Security Council, so they would be likely to look askance at any weakening of the body. But both have also tried to curry favor with Mr. Trump. China has said it was invited, but not whether it would accept. President Putin of Russia also stopped short of accepting the invitation, saying his foreign ministry needed to analyze the matter. But in an example of how countries can try to use Mr. Trump's ambitions to advance their own interests, Mr. Putin added that Russia was prepared to contribute $1 billion to the board, as long as the money comes out of the Russian assets that were frozen in the West after Mr. Putin invaded Ukraine. The draft charter for the board stipulates the $1 billion fee for countries to seek to stay on for longer than a 3-year term. A U.S. official said on Tuesday that the board will implement the highest financial controls and oversight mechanisms for the cash it collects, and that funds will sit only in approved accounts at reputable banks. The U.S. official confirmed that Mr. Trump could play a central role in the board even after leaving the presidency. Mr. Trump can hold the chairmanship until he resigns it, the official said. A future U.S. president, however, may choose to appoint or designate the United States representative to the board. Mr. Weller, the peace negotiations specialist, argued that the expected $1 billion contributions could further sap funding from the UN, whose agencies were told by the United States in December that they needed to adapt, shrink, or die. And he said that the central personal role envisioned by Mr. Trump was unlike any other agreement he had seen in his experience in international affairs. It was, he said, unlikely to represent a sustainable pathway to world peace. Peace in the world requires a broad international consensus, Mr. Weller said. They can hardly be created through a new institution that is entirely dependent on the will of one man. Okay, moving on to next article. The leverage that Europe has over the U.S. economy. After the latest bout of trade turmoil with the United States, European leaders are looking for ways to project strength to the Trump administration, which considers them weak. Excuse me. On any given day, millions of Europeans use Microsoft software, heat their homes with American natural gas, and buy U.S. stocks. Many Americans work with German software, drink French wine, and take European-made medicines. More than $5.4 billion worth of goods and services are traded between the United States and Europe and the European Union each day, backed by extensive cross-border investments that support millions of jobs. Although President Trump walked back a threat to impose extra tariffs on several European nations to force the sale of Greenland, the turmoil was a clarifying moment for European officials. They are looking at this enormous flow of goods, services, and investments across the Atlantic as a potential source of leverage over the United States. On Thursday, leaders from the European Union say they will meet in Brussels to coordinate on the way forward. European leaders cannot act as though the last few weeks did not happen, said Ian Bond, Deputy Director of the Center of European Reform, a think tank. This was the most serious crisis in transatlantic relations in a long time, but with Trump in the White House, it will not be the last. Beyond tit-for-tat tariffs and other reactive measures, how can Europeans project strength to an administration that considers them weak? What would it take to deter an unpredictable partner who dismisses the global economic order and expects others to bend to his will? The Europeans could do bombastic things too, said Peter Chase, a senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund in Brussels. The question is, he said, do they gain anything from that, or do they just hurt themselves? Selling U.S. bonds. The United States is on an unsustainable debt trajectory, said Richard Portes, an economic professor at the London Business School. This is the major weakness of the United States right now, economically. And so, he said, Europe's strongest economic leverage is in the financial sector. European investors hold vast amounts of U.S. financial assets, including $2 trillion of Treasury debt. The U.S. government runs a large deficit that depends on foreign creditors to purchase these bonds. What if they stop buying? If that raises then the cost of capital for the U.S. government, said Mr. Chase of the German Marshall Fund, then that, I think, would be something that people would have to pay attention to. President Trump threatened to retaliate against European countries to sell off, or European countries that sell off U.S. bonds. If they do, they do. But if that would happen, there would be a big retaliation on our part. And we have all the cards, the president told Fox Business in an interview airing Thursday. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, has downplayed the threat. It is a completely false narrative, he said at a news briefing this week in Davos, Switzerland, noting that the Treasury market forms the foundation of the global financial system. The importance of U.S. Treasuries held in huge sums by central banks, sovereign funds, and asset managers around the world, means that the pain of a sell-off would be felt widely, including in Europe. But there are signs that some Europeans are questioning the creditworthiness of the United States. Akademiker Pension, a Danish pension fund, said this week that it would sell its roughly $100 million in treasuries by the end of the month. Targeting the services trade. There are more than 450 million people living in the European Union, and American companies sell a lot of services to them. Last year, the bloc bought more services from the United States, about $300 billion, than it exported, about $200 billion, according to U.S. data. That surplus makes the United States vulnerable because it's potentially also strong leverage for the EU to say no to those services coming into the European market, said Eric van der Marel, the chief economist at the European Center for International Political Economy, a research institute. But, he warned, if you would boycott these kind of services into your own market, that trickles down to a reduced competitiveness of your industries. Digital services provided by U.S. tech companies would be hardest to replace, he added. European substitutes could be more readily found for consultancy and financial services. Mr. Portis of the London Business School also warned about limiting U.S. tech services, including artificial intelligence, because they are popular in Europe. But officials could exert pressure by increasing taxes on digital services. A handful of European countries, including Britain and France, have imposed levies on the revenues of online marketplaces, advertisers, and search engines. That has angered the Trump administration, which considers Europe's stricter tech policies unfairly discriminatory against the United States. How credible are these threats? The true test of Europe's leverage is its ability to enact any of these measures. In Davos, Mr. Bessent ridiculed Europe's often convoluted decision-making process. He said that officials would form the dreaded European Working Group rather than devise a forceful response to Mr. Trump's demands over Greenland. That limitation was on display on Wednesday when the European Parliament voted to delay a long-negotiated trade deal between the European Union and 4 South American countries, a setback that the bloc push to diversify its trading relationships. The decision was absolutely irresponsible, said Bernd Lang, the chair of the European Parliament's International Trade Committee. This is an own goal. Okay, moving on. Trump says he has framework for a Greenland deal as NATO molds idea of U.S. sovereignty over bases. President Trump's announcement appeared to draw the United States back from the possibility of military and economic conflict with American allies over Greenland. President Trump said Wednesday that he had reached the framework of a deal with NATO over Greenland's future, hours after alliance officials separately discussed the possibility of the United States obtaining sovereignty over land for military bases, according to 3 senior officials familiar with the talks. Mr. Trump's announcement was among a series of moves on Wednesday that appeared to draw the United States back from the possibility of military and economic conflict with his allies over Greenland, an autonomous territory of Denmark. Mr. Trump also withdrew the threat of additional tariffs for European allies that had resisted his insistence on owning Greenland and said he would not use force to assert American ownership. Mr. Trump capped those concessions on Wednesday evening with an announcement on Truth Social that he and Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, had formed the framework of a future deal with respect to Greenland and, in fact, the entire Arctic region, without offering any details about the framework. He added, "This solution, if consummated, will be a great one for the United States of America and all NATO nations." Mr. Trump's announcement came after officials discussed the possibility of a territorial compromise during meetings on Wednesday in Brussels among top military officers from NATO's member states, according to the senior Western officials familiar with the talks. The officials said that Mr. Rutte had been pursuing a compromise this week, but they did not know if the concept of the United States having some sovereignty over small pockets of Greenland for military bases was part of the framework announced by Mr. Trump. One of the officials who attended the meetings compared the concept to the United Kingdom's bases in Cyprus, which are regarded as British territory. A second official who was briefed on the discussions also confirmed that the idea for Greenland was modeled after the sovereign British bases in Cyprus. As for details of the framework that Mr. Trump announced, NATO said in a statement that negotiations between Denmark, Greenland, and the United States will go forward aimed at ensuring that Russia and China never gain a foothold, economically or militarily, in Greenland. Mr. Rutte did not release details of the possible framework. Allison Hart, a spokeswoman for Mr. Rutte, said that he did not propose any compromise to sovereignty during his meeting with the president in Davos. The Danish Prime Minister's office did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Asia Chemnitz, a Greenlandic member of the Danish Parliament, rejected what Mr. Trump said about his potential deal with NATO. What we are witnessing these days in statements from Trump is completely absurd. NATO has absolutely no mandate to negotiate anything whatsoever without us in Greenland, she said in a post on social media. Nothing about us without us, she added, saying there is total confusion being created. News of the possible framework came hours after Mr. Trump told European leaders in Davos, Switzerland, that he would not settle for anything less than the United States taking ownership of Greenland. Mr. Trump had promised dire economic and security consequences for Europe if he did not get his way. Addressing a room full of heads of state, billionaires, and other world leaders, Mr. Trump said repeatedly that the United States needed Greenland for national security purposes. He said that only the United States was strong enough to defend Greenland from external threats, and that defending it made sense only if the United States owned it. He called for immediate negotiations to discuss transferring ownership of the semi-autonomous island to the United States from Denmark and derided European countries as dependent on the United States. Without us, most of the countries don't even work, Mr. Trump said. The day encapsulated Mr. Trump's second-term approach to global power and policymaking, alternating between coercing and humiliating once close allies in the pursuit of a goal that he appears to see as a critical piece of his legacy. We probably won't get anything unless I decide to use excessive strength and force where we would be, frankly, unstoppable, Mr. Trump said. But I won't do that. That's probably the biggest statement because people thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force. All the United States is asking for is a place called Greenland. A few breaths later, though, Mr. Trump issued explicit and implicit threats to European leaders if they did not grant his wishes. He reminded the audience that he had unilaterally taxed imports to the United States from countries across Europe and beyond. having already threatened to increase tariffs on Denmark and several European countries that expressed solidarity with Denmark and Greenland. As is often the case in their delicate dealings with Mr. Trump, some European leaders reacted to what they saw as the most positive note in their remarks, his pledge not to deploy troops, and expressed hope that they might reach a compromise over Greenland's future. Rasmus Jarlov, chairman of the Defense Committee in Denmark's parliament, said in an interview that we've heard a lot worse from Mr. Trump. I'm glad he's ruling out military force, he said. I didn't see in his remarks today an escalation. He insists he wants Greenland, but that's not new. Of course, we still insist that we are not handing over Greenland. Mr. Trump left little room for compromise in his speech. However, many European leaders have maintained that they cannot countenance ceding ownership of Greenland to the United States, but they also say they would be open to almost any other arrangement that expands America's presence there. On Wednesday, Mr. Trump said, again, that would not suffice. You need the ownership to defend it, Mr. Trump said. A moment later, he added, who the hell wants to defend a license agreement or a lease? All right, then, on to next article. The voters who have taken a U-turn on Trump. 1 year later, the second Trump coalition has come apart, a Times and Siena poll finds. When President Trump took office for his second term 1 year ago, he was, at least compared with his usual polling, relatively popular. His approval rating was above 50%, and he had made enormous breakthroughs among groups that have traditionally voted Democrat, like young, non-white, and lower turnout voters. It had some of the markings of a potential political realignment. It even brought a much noted vibe shift. 1 year later, that vibe has shifted back. The results from today's New York Times Siena poll would have looked fairly typical during his first term. Only 40% of registered voters said they approved Mr. Trump's performance, and the familiar patterns of American politics have returned. The second Trump coalition has unraveled. The major demographic shifts of the last election have snapped back. In today's poll, Mr. Trump's approval rating by demographic groups looks almost exactly as it did in Times Siena polling in the run-up to his defeat in 2020. If anything, young and non-white voters are even likelier to disapprove Mr. Trump than they were then, while he retains most of his support among older and white voters. Similarly, Democrats have regained their usual advantage among young, non-white, and low turnout voters in the race for control of Congress. Overall, Democrats lead by 5 percentage points among registered voters nationwide, a tally that would easily be enough for the party to take back the House of Representatives. It's the largest lead for the Democrats in Times Siena national poll since 2020. And it's similar to Joe Biden's eventual 4.5-point popular vote victory that year. There's one exception to this reversal to the old first-term norm, party identification. Self-identified Democrats have outnumbered Republicans for decades before Republicans edged ahead in 2024. And they continue to lead by 3 points in today's poll. It's a lingering reminder that some like a political realignment. If still quiet a bit less than that, really did happen during the Biden years. But already Mr. Trump has squandered it. Why has Mr. Trump lost so much ground? In one sense, there's no shortage of explanations. voters have an unfavorable view of Mr. Trump's performance on almost every issue tested on the poll, including his handling of immigration and the economy and his approach to Russia, Israel, and other foreign relations. Even over just the last few weeks, another round of new issues could have hurt Mr. Trump's standing, like the U.S. military operation in Venezuela, his threats against Greenland, or the fatal shooting of a woman by an Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent in Minneapolis. Still, there's more evidence that the economy is driving voters away from Mr. Trump than anything else. On questions after questions, voters gave him negative marks on his handling of that issue, including just 34% who approve of his handling of the cost of living, compared with 64% who disapprove. This is his second worst result in the poll, trailing only his handling of the Jeffrey Epstein files. And over our last two polls, the voters who have soured on Mr. Trump, those who say they voted for him in 2024 but disapprove of him today, have been likeliest to cite an economic issue as the biggest problem facing the country. 44% of the Trump defectors cite economy issues, compared with just 24% of other voters. This is a familiar story. The economy was one of the biggest reasons these same voters flipped to support Mr. Trump in the first place. In the last campaign, these voters disapproved of Mr. Biden's handling of the economy, said it was the most important issue, and said they thought Mr. Trump would handle the issue well. Today, all those conditions have flipped, and these voters have as well. To be sure, all of these other issues, including the new ones, like ICE's conduct in Minneapolis or Mr. Trump's threats against Greenland, contribute to the president's political problems, just as immigration or the backlash against woke contributed to Mr. Biden's unpopularity and Kamala Harris's defeat. About half of today's defectors from Mr. Trump cited something other than the economy as the most important problem facing the country. Many of those issues, democracy, polarization, or even Mr. Trump himself, reflect deep concern about his actions among an electoral decisive sliver of voters who backed him in the last election. But on balance, the poll suggests that Mr. Trump is held back as much or more by the usual laws of political gravity as by a backlash against his extraordinary conduct. This is not necessarily a huge surprise. He won the presidency despite facing criminal charges and a felony conviction, after all. But back in 2024, political gravity was dragging down the Democrats. Mr. Biden was an unpopular president, and voters were deeply dissatisfied with the state of the economy. This time, the same forces are dragging down Mr. Trump. Okay, next article. ICE said agents can enter homes without judicial warrant, the group claims. A whistleblower group said a memo apparently signed by the leader of Immigration and Customs Enforcement violated constitutional protections against unreasonable search and seizure. A whistleblower group on Wednesday said that U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement officials drafted guidance saying that deportation officers are allowed to enter homes to arrest people without a judicial warrant. The claim was based on information provided by two government officials, said the group, called Whistleblower Aid. The group released a copy of a memo dated May 12, 2025, and apparently signed by Todd Lyons, the acting leader of ICE, that advises agents that they can enter homes on the basis of an administrative warrant. An administrative warrant is different from a judicial arrest warrant. It is typically drawn up after an immigration judge has ordered someone deported and serves as the basis to arrest them. A judicial arrest warrant is a court order based on probable cause that a crime was committed. Whistleblower aid said the guidance violates the constitutional protection from unreasonable search and seizure. Excuse me. DHS's new policy to permit arrests in an alien's residence without a judicial warrant or consent is a complete break from the law and undercuts the Fourth Amendment and the rights it protects, whistleblower aid said in a statement. As far as our clients understand, DHS has failed to articulate any change in the law to allow for a policy reversal of this magnitude. The Times has not independently verified the memo or spoke to whistleblowers involved, who are described as two U.S. government officials. The whistleblower's claim was reported earlier by the Associated Press. One Homeland Security Department official who spoke on the condition of remaining anonymous had not seen the memo, but said their understanding was that the idea was piloted in one or two locations earlier this year. The whistleblower group said that the memo was not widely distributed within ICE. Rather, some ICE officials were provided an opportunity to read the memo in the presence of a supervisor and give it back. One of the whistleblowers, according to the group, said that agents were entering homes without judicial warrants in Texas, and that the practice was carried out there because of conservative judges in the area. Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat of Connecticut, called for hearings and demanded an explanation from the Homeland Security Department's leader, Kristi Noem. Every American should be terrified by this secret ICE policy authorizing its agents to knock down your door and storm into your home, Mr. Blumenthal said in a statement. It is a legally and morally abhorrent policy that exemplifies the kinds of dangerous and disgraceful abuses America is seeing in real time. Department of Homeland Security officials did not contest the specific allegations made by the whistleblower group. Every illegal alien who DHS serves administrative warrants, I-205s, said Tricia McLaughlin, an agency spokeswoman, has had full due process and a final order of removal from an immigration judge. The officers issuing these administrative warrants also have found probable cause, she added. For decades, the Supreme Court and Congress have recognized the propriety of administrative warrants in cases of immigration enforcement. ICE officers historically have relied on people voluntarily opening the doors of their homes to make arrests, or by tracking down targets in public spaces. The inability to enter homes has long stymied officers, in part because rights advocates advise immigrants not to open their doors when immigration officials arrive. A 2025 Homeland Security Training Manual indicated that the agency itself agreed that entering homes without a judicial warrant was prohibited. Entering a home to arrest a person without a warrant or an exception to the warrant requirement is typically a violation of the Fourth Amendment, regardless of whether the officer has probable cause to arrest the suspect, the manual reads. The May 12th memo acknowledged that relying on administrative warrants to enter homes would be a new practice. Although the U.S. Department of Homeland Security has not historically relied on administrative warrants alone to arrest aliens subject to final orders of removal in their place of residence, the memo reads, the DHS Office of General Counsel has recently determined that the U.S. Constitution, the Immigration and Nationality Act, and the immigration regulations do not prohibit relying on administrative warrants for this purpose. The memo adds that officers and agents must knock and announce themselves first, but says that if an immigrant does not respond, they can use a reasonable amount of force to enter the home. To be clear, a Form I-205 is not a search warrant and should only be used to enter the residence of the subject alien to conduct an administrative immigration arrest, the memo states. Former ICE officials were concerned about the disclosure of its implications. I profoundly disagree with the legal interpretation of the Constitution and laws related to administrative warrants in this memo and believe ICE is undermining our constitutional order in their zeal to meet a quota, said Carrie Doyle, who was the top ICE lawyer during the Biden administration. Okay, next article. This is not an average winter storm, weather experts warn. Half the U.S. population will likely see some effect from the sprawling storm that will move across the country this weekend. The impending winter storm that will sprawl across the eastern two-thirds of the United States this weekend is expected to deliver a menacing mix of every possible winter hazard as it barrels across the country. The storm is likely to fall into the echelon of unusually impactful storms, said Alex Lamers, a meteorologist with the Weather Prediction Center. One of the countless weather experts who have been kept on their toes this week, as forecasters and the computer models they rely on have frequently upended expectations for what the expansive storm will ultimately do. It's not something you see every winter, Mr. Lamers said, adding that the storm is likely to affect about half the U.S. population, with accumulating ice, sleet, or snow. And once the storm has moved on, leaving a blanket of ice in the south and a foot or more of snow in parts of the northeast, it will be followed by potentially record-breaking cold temperatures that will leave millions of people in a deep freeze well into next week. The storm's complex structure will dictate what it does and where. Heavy snow in the northern flank, a heart of sleet and freezing rain in the middle, and plain rain to the south. But on Thursday morning, with the storm's arrival a day away, its trajectory and its interaction with physical features like the Appalachian Mountains are already forcing more last-minute shifts in the forecast. The estimated timing. While the precise track is still evolving, here are the current windows of impact across the country. On Friday, the storm takes shape as it emerges from the southern Rockies, potentially producing snow in New Mexico and Colorado before spreading into the plains of Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. Winter storm warnings were already in place in parts of Oklahoma. On Saturday, the system expands significantly. Freezing rain, sleet, and snow will likely continue in Texas, Arkansas, and Tennessee, while snow will move across the Midwest. By Saturday evening, the system will push into Georgia and the Carolinas. On Sunday, the system reaches the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, where it could intensify. Temperatures will be well below normal in the plains. On Monday and into the midweek, even after the snow clears, brutal cold will settle in across the eastern United States. Why the hazard type matters. Every winter storm is a battle of degrees. In this setup, the specific types of precipitation, dictated in part by the temperature, will determine the level of damage some communities may face. Freezing rain. In areas that receive heavy freezing rain, ice could accumulate to upward of a half an inch. The weight of this accumulation is often enough to cause significant damage to trees and power lines. For sleet, several inches of sleet, small ice pellets, could pile up. Unlike snow, sleet can quickly pack into an impermeable icy layer on roads and sidewalks, making them nearly impossible to clear. And of course, snow. In the heaviest bands, it is becoming more likely that more than a foot of snow will fall. Snow is one thing, but when you start talking about significant accumulation of sleet or freezing rain in particular, that's the stuff that really causes more damage, said Eric Fisher, chief meteorologist with WBZ TV in Boston and author of a book chronicling major storms in New England. The funnel of certainty. Forecasters are navigating what Mr. Fisher calls a funnel of certainty. Several days out, meteorologists rely on patterns recognition that begin to tell people what they think a storm will most likely do. As a storm draws closer, within a day or two of its arrival, the funnel narrows into what he calls actionable information, as meteorologists gain a clearer understanding of a storm's specific expected behavior. One significant hurdle in those final days before a storm like this hits is the push of air from the Arctic that will move through the country on Thursday. Arctic air is like a bully, Mr. Fisher said. It's cold. It pushes everything kind of out of the way. In the last day, this storm's expected path has shifted further north than forecasters expected, a surprise given the strength of the cold air mass. Forecasters said the Northeast may see some of the highest snow totals in the coming days, made all the more notable because many places in the region have gone years without a significant winter storm, Mr. Fisher said. In terms of our reasonable worst case, it could easily be a foot plus, said Nelson Vaz, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service in New York. In places like Texas, the scenario is particularly precarious. A transition from freezing rain to sleet and then snow can create a hazardous phenomenon known as cobblestone ice. David Bonet, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service in Fort Worth, noted that the term is a triggering word for the metro area. In December 2013, ice formed an impermeable base layer that work crews could not treat fast enough, shutting the city down for days. Farther east, Nashville sits in the dividing line between manageable snow and a crippling ice storm. For instance, Interstate 40, which runs west to east across the long, skinny state of Tennessee, serves as the rough boundary for that transition. Little shifts have big impacts, Mr. Fisher warned. If you've got your heaviest snow line in Nashville, and then all of a sudden it's 30 or 40 miles north, well, now we've got an ice storm situation in the city. As the storm moves through the southeast, forecasters will also be watching for a shallow feature known as a cold air damming wedge. This pool of cold air can get trapped against the Appalachians and force its way south into the Atlanta area, increasing the odds for ice. Larger models are just not quite able to capture it reliably, said Samuel Marlowe, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service in Atlanta. After the precipitation ends, a huge mass of cold air from the Arctic will settle in. Mr. Lamers and others at the Weather Prediction Center said they were becoming more concerned that these below freezing temperatures would linger in some areas that receive significant sleet or snow, potentially for a week or more. In Nashville, Corey Mueller, a meteorologist for the Weather Service, warned that the plummeting temperatures mean that whatever falls, snow or ice, will stick around, making recovery more difficult into the middle of the week. Okay, on to the next article. Jack Smith to testify before Congress on Trump investigations. The appearance provides Mr. Smith what with what is likely to be his best opportunity to challenge President Trump's assertion that he was prosecuted for his politics, not his misdeeds. Jack Smith never got his day in court, but he is finally getting his day in the court of public opinion. Mr. Smith, the special prosecutor who twice indicted Donald Trump, is set to appear at a public hearing of the House Judiciary Committee on Thursday in a long-awaited confrontation that pits Mr. Trump's defenders against the man who tried and failed to hold him to account. The hearing poses significant risk to Mr. Smith, who has said he believes Mr. Trump and his appointees will seize on the smallest misstep to investigate, prosecute, and humiliate him, but also provides him with what is likely to be his best opportunity to challenge Mr. Trump's justification for deploying the Justice Department to pursue his enemies, that he was persecuted for his politics, not for his misdeeds. No one should be above the law in our country, and the law required that to be held to account, Mr. Smith is expected to say, according to a copy of his opening remarks. So that is what I did. Mr. Smith's 3-page statement represents the summation he was never allowed to deliver in a courtroom, and concludes that Mr. Trump engaged in criminal activity that undermined democracy and the rule of law. In his remarks, Mr. Smith is expected to accuse Mr. Trump of directing an angry mob to attack the Capitol, then exploiting the violence to delay congressional certification of Joe Biden's electoral victory in 2020. Over 140 heroic law enforcement officers were assaulted that day, a fact that we should never forget, Mr. Smith is expected to say. The path that led to Mr. Smith's testimony mirrored a torturous legal and political odyssey that began in 2023, when he filed the first ever federal criminal charges against the former president. It ended the next year when Mr. Trump won the presidency, intent on visiting vengeance on those who had prosecuted him. For all their public denunciations of Mr. Smith, House Republicans had been privately reluctant to give him a public forum to make his case against Mr. Trump, after courts threw out charges against him in Florida and the District of Columbia. Thursday's testimony follows months of back and forth. Lawmakers debated how to proceed, and Mr. Smith demanded that he be given the right to defend his team. Lawmakers and Mr. Smith's lawyers are wrestling over what the former special prosecutor was allowed to talk about: the election interference, indictment in Washington, and what he was not allowed to discuss. Many details about the document retention case sealed by a Trump-appointed judge in Florida. The committee's chairman, Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, scheduled the public hearing following closed-door testimony by Mr. Smith on December 17th, an appearance that struck even his Republican critics as sure-footed and free of the type of misstep that might have led to a criminal prosecution on the grounds that he deceived or stonewalled Congress. Republicans, led by Mr. Jordan and Senator Charles Grassley, Republican of Iowa, and the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, have suggested that Mr. Smith was motivated by partisan politics and have placed him at the center of what they have said was a conspiracy to weaponize the Justice Department against Mr. Trump and his allies. The FBI, now run by a Trump ally, Kash Patel, has scoured its vast holdings to root out negative information about those who once investigated Mr. Trump and his supporters, an undertaking critics have called an opposition research operation. On the eve of Mr. Smith's appearance, the Bureau continued to selectively release portions of Mr. Smith's files to impugn him and the work of his team. This time, the disclosure was made to the conservative journalist John Solomon. On Wednesday morning, he cited FBI documents in reporting that prosecutors working for Mr. Smith had paid thousands of dollars to online sleuths to help them look for video evidence tying Trump supporters who attacked the president's rally near the White House on January 6th to the subsequent riot at the Capitol. The work of the sleuths, often known as sedition hunters, was widely used to bring criminal charges against hundreds of the rioters. But Mr. Battelle told Mr. Solomon that Mr. Smith's payments for their help amounted to a stunning abuse of Bureau authorities. Mr. Battelle also vowed to disclose the material to Congress, raising the possibility that Mr. Smith would be questioned about the sedition hunters on Thursday. The last time Mr. Smith testified in the closed-door session, he spoke freely about the charges he filed accusing Mr. Trump of seeking to overturn the results of the 2020 election. But he was more constrained in commenting on the other criminal case he brought, which charged Mr. Trump with illegally holding on to reams of classified material after leaving the White House in 2021. He will face the same prohibition in his testimony on Thursday, given that the expansive report he wrote about the documents case remained under seal because of an order issued by Judge Aileen Cannon, the Trump appointee who oversaw the proceeding. Her order expires on February 24th, but Mr. Trump has been trying to prevent the report from seeing the light of day. On Tuesday, his lawyers asked Judge Cannon to permanently keep it under wraps, arguing that its release would improperly endorse Mr. Smith's unlawful investigation and prosecution of the case and irreparably harm Mr. Trump. Mr. Smith was appointed in late 2022 to oversee the investigations, but he dropped both cases after Mr. Trump was elected to a second term, citing court rulings that prevented prosecution of a sitting president. The House Judiciary Committee has already made a criminal referral of one of Mr. Smith's top deputies, Thomas Windom, to the Justice Department for not fully answering similar questions. Mr. Windom, now Mr. Smith's law partner, has denied any wrongdoing. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times, from the January 22nd issue of the New York Times, on the Niagara Frontier Reading Radio service. Your reader today has been Mark Grier. Thank you so much for listening.